Welcome to the McAfee Center Stage webinar series. My name is Nick, and I will be your host. This webinar is a brief overview covering common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing. If assistance is needed, please contact McAfee Technical Support. Our presenter today is Trent Dodson. Trent is a technical support engineer based in McAfee's Plano office. Trent joined McAfee in November of 2018. In his role at McAfee, he provides support for McAfee SIEM, database security, and policy auditor. Trent is also a USMC veteran and is currently studying finance at Purdue Global University. Ladies and gentlemen, Trent.
Thanks, Nick, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Just a quick rundown of our agenda today. We're going to talk about some of the benefits of version 11 of the SIEM. We're going to talk about some architecture changes in version 11. We're going to go through the upgrade process overview in its entirety, starting with the pre-upgrade activities, which will include preparation, backup tasks, planning our network configuration changes, and then finally obtaining upgrade files. From there, we're going to move on to actually implementing the upgrade, following a workflow. So, the device orders, starting with the ESM, and then the ELMs, and then the rest of the devices. And then finally, maybe most importantly, we'll go through the post-upgrade recommendations, including, just verifying all the configurations look right, writing and rolling out all our settings, and then finally some fine-tuning. So starting with some significant enhancements in version 11, we have our architectural improvements. So we've added the data streaming bus. This is based off Kafka. This is going to allow our events to kind of get around and transfer between our devices at a much greater rate of speed. There's also a new appliance type called the DSP. This is a standalone data streaming bus. It's not a requirement of 11. It's only delivered as a VM, but it is required if you're trying to run a distributed ESM setup or using data sharing. And finally, we've introduced clustering, so they can now be grouped together, your ESMs, for a nice performance improvement, as well as a bit of resiliency against faults. So we do have those flexible configuration options. You can use replication, what most people would call redundancy in 10, and now also that scaling. So for replication, all your data will be duplicated across your replica ESMs. This is the default state if you actually just upgrade a redundant ESM setup in 10. You'll now have a replica setup in 11. Scaling is going to provide that, of course, improved performance by separating your data. It's going to allow these queries to run simultaneously, and it kind of combines those. So the idea there is to get the data back as fast as possible from the least busy ESMs. And we can, of course, combine these configurations as well. You kind of get the best of both worlds there. You'll need at least a minimum of 4 ESMs to do that. It's very important to note that you need to remove redundancy if you plan on setting up scaling. Otherwise, like I said, the default will be to go right into just replica mode. We've also added some increased support for some cloud deployments through Azure, AWS, and OCI. We have expanded raw log support for that cold storage in the ELM and the hot storage on the ELS. Our backups are a little different now in 11. They don't require any downtime. We've added a couple of pretty exciting content packs as well. And the HTML5 interface now has an auto refresh. To help visualize this, we have this graphic here. This just shows the differences here in 11. Your events are going to come in to your receivers where they'll be collected and parsed. And then they'll be loaded onto the Kafka data bus. From there, the ELS, the ACE, and your ESMs will all consume from the data bus. So this is a much more efficient process to get your events around to where they're needed. The ELM actually doesn't change. It kind of uses the same method as it always has. The receiver just sends it straight to the ELM for that retention and compliance. A few more details on clustering here. Clustering ESMs are going to allow for linear scaling to increase your throughput and ensure that data integrity. They give you that high scalability and high availability. So if one goes down, you should be able to recover from that. They allow hardware or virtual appliances. This allows for managed geodiverse installations such as in data centers and allows the separation of nodes. It also allows the flexible configuration options and simplified management across all of your ESMs. In any clustered environment, one node will always act as a management node, performing those management functions for the rest of the cluster. Replication. This is going to allow us to replicate our data, of course, to multiple ESMs. This creates an exact copy of your data from one to the other to prevent data loss. This is going to give you that high availability access. If you lose access to your primary, you can always fall back over to your standby without a lengthy process. You can log right in and see and start immediately kind of working where you left off. This will give you some performance gains when it comes to queries as well, because the primary is doing things like working on alarms and such. So whenever those queries are offloaded to your standby ESMs, you get your answers a little quicker typically. And you can, of course, increase the number of replicas to scale with you to increase that tolerance to failure and the durability of your data. Keep in mind also this is the default state. Whenever you upgrade a redundant ESM in 10, without breaking the redundancy, you will now have a replica in 11. With scaling, we introduce a modular approach through data sharding to query event data across all of your ESMs. You can add as many ESMs as your needs dictate. This is going to enhance the system throughput rates by obviously using the power of multiple devices to process your data. Each ESM in a scaled cluster contains a portion of your data, and queries run simultaneously on all of the ESMs. Again, if you want to set up scaling, you have to remove redundancy first before you upgrade. And finally, bringing these all together and kind of providing the best of both worlds would be adding scaling and replication together. Again, you need at least a minimum of 4 ESMs to actually get this capability, but this is going to give you both that high availability as well as that scalability. Okay, so now that we have the architectural changes out of the way, we'll dive into the actual upgrade process. So we're going to go through the stages and the activities here. Starting with our pre-upgrade tasks, of course we start with preparation. There are some recommended health checks and verifications that you can run through that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail soon. We want to take all of our backups. So of course that includes stuff like custom policies, rules, alarms, anything that's custom for you, you want to back up obviously. The next thing we'll talk about is your actual network configuration changes. So there are going to be some firewall rules that will need to probably be changed or added to make 11 work that 10 didn't necessarily require. So we'll list all those ports out. Also, we'll talk about actually obtaining the upgrade files. Which upgrade files do you actually need to obtain? Which ones apply to which devices? From there, we're going to actually move on to implementing the upgrade itself. So we'll follow an upgrade workflow. It will basically tell you which device to upgrade first. If you have more advanced setups, it will tell you how to approach those as well. We're going to start with the ESM and then move on to our ELMs. We'll, of course, talk about redundancy and things like that. And then we'll move on to the rest of our devices. So our receivers, our ACEs, DEM, and ADM. And then more specifically, if you have an HA set up for your receivers, we'll talk about that as well. Finally, we're going to go through the post-upgrade process, which starts with rekeying all the devices, writing out the cluster settings, confirming that all of your communication looks appropriate, confirming all of your receivers, HA included, show that okay. We're going to upload a manual rule update to our ESM. We're going to write out all of our device settings. We're going to roll out policy for everything. And then finally, hopefully, we'll go through and start our fine-tuning process, which can be an ongoing process for the ESM, as many of you guys know. We also do highly recommend that you go ahead and apply the latest hotfix as well. And the stuff on the right here is just things that technical support is doing to hopefully make this a little bit easier, there's a landing page. It's just a KB that kind of talks about upgrading to 11.3. It's very useful. So hopefully this webinar helps, but that's a really nice resource as well. And of course there's some YouTube videos out and the forums as well. So let's get started here with our pre-upgrade tasks, where hopefully we'll set ourselves up for success before we begin to actually implement the upgrade. First, we'll start with preparation. We want to check our upgrade compatibility. If you are on version 10.4 or 11.2 already, you can use the Upgrade Advisor. You'll download the target version JSON file from our website, and then you can run that just to see if your environment is compatible, and it will spit out a lot of useful information, which we'll see here pretty shortly. Just a quick note, if you are upgrading from any version prior to 10.0.0, you should contact support rather before you proceed. System requirements for your upgrade. These are well laid out in documentation. They're directly linked here. There's a KB as well. And you can also, and should also, check and see if your hardware is EOL or if it's current. You're going to also want to make sure, or decide rather, if you want to use clustering. As we noticed a couple of times already, it's something that you do need to know before you actually proceed with the upgrade. It's advisable to go ahead and perform a health check on all of your devices before you upgrade. This is going to ensure that the process is as trouble-free as it can be. And there's a couple of things here that are kind of the common things that we can check to make our lives a little bit easier. Disk space. Do we have enough disk space for the upgrade to actually land on the device? That's going to be a minimum. And really, you should have at least 150 gigabytes free on each of these devices, the ELM and combo boxes. For your VMs, one major change is instead of a minimum of 250 gig, you'll need to go up to 500 gigs to support the Kafka data bus. You're going to want to check your health flags. So do you have a lot of inactive flags? You might want to check through those. If we have red flags, do we know about them? Are they serious? Should we investigate them more? It's best practice to always be flag free. And finally, we'll go through connectivity. Obviously, can our devices talk to one another? Are they keyed? Are ports open? And are the processes running? The Upgrade Advisor checks a lot of this stuff for you. It doesn't check your ports, but it checks a lot of those other things. So from here, we can go ahead and check our disk space. We can do this right through the GUI by going down to that device status view. And then clicking the desired device that we want to see the disk space on. We can also kind of check while we're here, do we have idle receivers that are not necessarily, or data sources for that matter, that are not necessarily in healthy state? Do we want to get them to that healthy state before we disable them? That way those flags are not really being displayed constantly, even if it's disabled. Are there any red flags? Is there anything obvious that we can kind of address here before we move on? And let's also go ahead and verify that we can actually connect to our key devices. So all you have to do there is go into the properties for each device, click on connection, and then click on the status button. And finally, we can check out the status of the processes running on each of those devices by simply going into system information and seeing if we have a display of OK or not. You can also hit the refresh button just to make sure that that's the most up-to-date. So again, we're just going to go into our devices here under System Information, and then just verify that that status looks okay. And then obviously we want to run down the checklist here in our physical display, check our receivers, check our data sources. Do we have critical flags? Do we have unknown? Do we have a big question mark there? We should definitely address that one as a priority. So next we'll talk about backups. Backups are pretty obviously important. We want to take good backups here. Just a note, during the install, a configuration backup is going to be saved, but you definitely need to preserve any of your other customization. So your alarms, your custom rules, any of those kind of things, we can also kind of export and make sure that they're good and saved. So you want to start with a ESM settings backup. So you're going to go into the system properties for your ESM, and then go to ESM management, and then maintenance, and then you'll click on backup and restore, and then go ahead and perform a backup now. This can be configured on network storage as an NFS. And then just one more point on the ESM backup. You probably do not want to perform a full backup if your environment is very large, because as you know, that's going to require some considerable downtime. That's of course up to you. But it's pretty important that you get the configuration and your alarms and rules and your reports and all that good stuff. The next thing you want to do is go into your ESM policies and filters. So go to alarms and watch lists, highlight all of your alarms, click export, and save that file. Then go into your policy editor, follow the same process for each rule type except data source, Windows events, ESM normalization, variable, and preprocessors. So click on the rule types, go to filters tagging, go to advanced, select user defined in the origin, and then refresh the list. Then you're going to highlight all of those and export them. So the next thing you do is go to the default policy again, go into File, then Export, and then click Policy. Select all custom rules and variables, and then save that as well. And finally, you're going to want to move on to the ELM. So go into your ELM and the properties, go into Backup and Restore under ELM Information, and then go ahead and verify that backup location is correct, and click Backup Now for the ELM. That's not going to show you the progress of that backup, but if you wait a few minutes, eventually it should say OK. So you'll know that it's finished. For our network configuration changes, it's quite important that this document is followed and that KB is utilized 84217. This will tell you all the necessary ports that the ESM and all the other associated devices are going to need, which does change when you go from 10 to 11. We do have a nice visualization of kind of how all the devices interact with each other over which ports. So that is available under the minimum requirements in docs.mcafee.com for the ESM for version 11. If you do want to look at that, it can be definitely helpful to see how those things interact. In SIEM, the additional ports are going to be for all devices, 1116, or sorry, 1116, 1119, 9092, and 2181. And then in a clustered environment, you need 1211, 1212, 8103, and 8104. All of this is documented in KB 84217, which I highly recommend that you review before you upgrade from 10 to 11. We definitely recommend using the Upgrade Advisor. Again, that's only going to be available in 10.4 and onwards. The documentation is out there. It's under the installation guide under Check Upgrade Compatibility. You're going to probably need to download your target version JSON file from us from the product downloads page using your grant, which this graphic shows, kind of what that looks like. And here's what the Upgrade Advisor actually looks like when you run it. You can see we're running it against version 11.3. It's going to check your disk space, so it requires that you actually have the disk space on each device that you need. It's going to check your data sources, so it's going to warn you about things like them being inactive. It will also check your connectivity, so it just verifies that the devices can connect to one another. Everything that's keyed anyway. It will also, which is probably the most important part for 11 especially, it will list all of your devices by IP and which ports they need to interact with one another through. So that's actually pretty huge and very helpful. If you're coming from 10.4, definitely run through the Upgrade Advisor. It will give you a nice list of things that you should double check. And finally, it will actually check the processes that should be running are actually running. And now that we run our Upgrade Advisor, we actually need to obtain our upgrade files themselves. So obviously you're going to go into your product downloads page using your grant, and then find the appropriate version that you want to upgrade to. And the files look something like this. If you're upgrading a standalone ESM, it's just going to say ESS_update and then a version that you're upgrading to. If you're upgrading a combo device, it will say ESS_REC. If you're upgrading an ADM, it will be at the APM update. The database event monitor has the DBM update, and basically all other SIM devices, ELMs, ACEs, receivers, etc., are going to use that receiver update file. While you're here, you're going to want to go ahead and grab the file for the manual rule update for the version that you're upgrading to. This is what this looks like as well, rule updates _ and then the version that you're upgrading. It's also very important that once you actually download these things that you need to go ahead and validate their checksums. So just in case, it's always a good idea to make sure that what you have actually matches what we've provided. And now that we actually have our files that we need, we'll move on to actually implementing the upgrade itself. We'll of course start with our ESM and our combo ESMs. Just a quick note, when upgrading, all of your active collectors are going to stop collecting data until you actually rewrite your device settings and roll out the policies. So that said, we'll go ahead and get our, following this flow chart. If we have a combo device, yes, go ahead and upgrade that and then move on. If it's a redundant ESM or just a primary ESM or a standalone ESM, just go ahead and do that. For the redundant, you'll do the primary first, and then you'll move on to the redundant or clustered ESMs after that. Next, we'll upgrade our ELMs. So basically what we're going to check is, do we have a redundant ELM setup? If so, we're going to upgrade the standby ELM first, and then we're going to upgrade the active ELM, and then we're going to go in and return it to service. Once that's actually done, you can verify on the system information page that both of those ELMs are in a good state. If you have just a standalone ELM, you're just going to do the easy process of going into the device management, and then the maintenance tab, and just upgrading the ELM as normal. Then you can move on to your ELSs, and finally your combo receivers. So lastly, we're going to go ahead and upgrade the rest of our devices. Any ADM, DBM, ACEs, or single receivers, you're going to go into their management and then the maintenance tab, and then click on upgrade that specific device, and then browse to the file. Do keep in mind also that this process can take several hours, depending on if your device is, has a large amount of data on it. So it's a good idea not to kind of panic if it doesn't come back up right away. And then finally, if you do have HA pair receivers, you're going to want to go in and set the primary receiver to no preference. This is going to allow you to fail over. And then go ahead and proceed to upgrade the secondary receiver first. And then you're going to want to return to service and then fail over to that secondary receiver, and then go ahead and upgrade the new secondary receiver and fail back over to that to get you into the state that you kind of started in. Once all of your devices have been upgraded, we'll go ahead and move on to finalizing that upgrade with our post-upgrade tasks. So again, we'll kick this off with a nice flow chart here for our post-upgrade tasks. Whether you're running a clustered or non-clustered environment, the first thing that you're actually going to do is write out those cluster settings. From there, on each device that's not an ESM or a combo device, you're going to go in and rekey it. So you're going to access the device properties for all your ACEs and receivers and ELMs and everything, and you're going to rekey them. It's a very important process in 11. That fixes a lot of issues, and it is a major post-upgrade task. After you're done with that, you basically just want to go into each device, access their device properties, check their version and build stamps, check their status. Are they okay? Are they not okay? Do we need to address them further? From there, go ahead and move on to rolling out your data sources. This is basically just going to reset those settings. So anything that is a receiver or a combo device with data sources, access those data sources in the settings, and then write those out and roll out policy. Next, you'll go into your ADM or your DEM if you have it, and roll out the policies for those devices as well. And then finally, you'll move on to your ACE. You're going to go into the properties of the ACE, go into your correlation managers, go ahead and disable those, and then re-enable the ones you want to use. While you're there, go ahead and edit and take a look at the filters and make sure that they're still accurate. And then write those settings out and roll the policy to the ACE. Okay, so before we actually log in, after we complete our upgrade, you're going to want to clear out your browser cache. You also want everyone else who uses it to clear out their browser cache. If you don't do so, you will probably experience some weird issues. And after the upgrade, if you are doing something like tailing varlog messages, you're very likely to see a bunch of spam of Snowflex and Snowman process messages. For the most part, these can safely be ignored. They don't necessarily indicate that you're having any issues, only that the upgrade processes can be quite a long one, and eventually they should stop, especially if you follow the directions here. You'll also notice that a rule update is being kicked off. The UI might not be available during that time, so you'll just have to wait it out for it to actually finish, and then you can go ahead and log in. Once you're able to actually log in, the first step again is going to be writing out the cluster settings. So again, even if you're running a single ESM, this is a necessary first step, and it will clean up a lot of issues. If you don't do this, you will run into some weird problems. So you're going to want to go into your ESM properties, select that clustering button, and then select your primary ESM device, and then make some sort of superficial change, or an artificial change rather. Just change the port up one and then back down to where the default, and then go ahead and write that out and click the yes button, and that's all you need to do. Our next step here will be to clean up all the SSH connections between all the devices. To start us off, we can go into the ESM, into key management, and regenerate SSH, but we're also going to rekey all of the other devices as well. So same place for the most part in the key management, and then rekey device. Next up is applying a manual rule update. So you're going to want to go into system information on the ESM. Assuming that you already have, of course, the manual rule update file downloaded from your product downloads page, you're going to browse to rule updates here, and then click on manual update, and then browse to that file and go ahead and upload it and click OK. This process will take about 20 minutes typically, but at the very end of it, the ESM should let you know that it's finished, and you can kind of move on. Then we'll go ahead and write out settings for our receivers and combo receivers. So go ahead and go into their properties and then click on data sources. This is probably a good idea and a good time to verify that these things look correct. Some of them are a bit overwhelming, but if any of them need to be unchecked, parsing, or moved to a different storage pool or what have you, it's a good time to do it now, and then go ahead and write those settings out. If you're using vulnerability assessment, you're also going to want to go into there, verify those things, and write that out as well. Then we'll take a look at our ACE, or ACEs, go into their properties, and then go into correlation management. You're going to want to go ahead and click on edit for all the correlation managers that you have. Just verify all those settings look good, that look appropriate. And it's also a good idea to check your filters. You want to make sure that nothing happened to those filters if you're using them, and then go ahead and write out those settings when you're done. If you're running the ACE in historical mode, go ahead and click on historical and verify that enable historical is checked. But even if it is checked, go ahead and uncheck and recheck it, and then hit apply. The next thing we want to do is verify our policy looks good. So we want to go into the policy editor, do any changes you want to actually make, or verify that things actually look correct, and then go ahead and roll that policy out to all devices. Of course, in some environments that are really, really large, you might need to schedule this for a later time. So you can also do that. Just know that until you write out and roll out all your policies, things might not totally work as you expect. So it's a good idea to actually verify that and get all this stuff completely done before kind of moving on. The next thing we want to do is for any device that's actually sending events to an ELM, we want to go in to the device configuration page in their properties and click on that sync ELM button. So this is going to resync that device to the ELM and ensure the communication is working. Now, something important to note about the restriction of historical data into the ESM. In 11, this has actually been moved to the receivers themselves, so this can be done per device instead of a system-wide setting on the ESM. So to check this, you're going to go into your receiver, go into events and flows, and then check those two boxes that say don't insert events older than or don't insert flows older than. And this is where you'll actually make that change, and then you can hit OK. After that, we're pretty much done. So the only thing that we want to do now is pretty much fine-tune our environment, which, this can be considered optional, but highly recommended for sure. So the first thing we want to do is check our flags. Check all of your individual devices to see what their flag status is, what it says, highlight it, go into active flags, see what's going on with them. If you have a bunch of idle flags for receivers, and maybe they should be idle because you're disabling them, it's usually a good idea to try to clear those idle flags out before you do that, or else they'll just always display as idle, which can be kind of annoying. But basically we want to see why are things inactive? Should they be inactive? Do we need to decommission things? This would probably be a good idea now that we're touching everything to kind of, help with the fine-tuning of the devices by doing this stuff. The next thing you'll do is check your dashboard views. Verify your data. Are we still getting data? Do we have data in near real time like we expect? Let's check our distribution chart. Let's go back and check and see if we have historical data. Does the last 30 days look normal? Does it look abnormal? Check your custom views. Verify that they're actually still there. Verify that they work as you expect. Go in and change the queries if you need to. Another good idea is changing your default system view. You want to make sure that you set that to whatever actually makes sense to you, with efficiency being kept kind of at the forefront. So basically every time you log in, if it makes sense to just have a blank view, you should set it up like that. If you need a certain other view, then obviously change it to that. Some things that you can try is the event summary and event distribution views instead of the normal default views. So basically those are about 8 queries instead of 30. You can check this yourself by setting up a quote-unquote fast default view, logging out and back in to see the difference. Next, you'll want to go look at the task manager. If you have views that are taking a really long time to load, those should show up there. So what we want to look for is things like broken regex and basically other poorly optimized queries. Next, we want to look at our alarms. Are our alarms optimized for short, precise queries? Do we have extremely short conditions? Are we checking alarms every single minute? Do you have many alarms checking every single minute? You're basically asking the system to check that alarm 1,440 times a day if it's at the 1 minute. You can see how this will quickly compound with many users running other queries when you have a lot of alarms that are set up like this. Alarms are the top priority of the system. So if you do have a lot of alarms like this, they will hog a ton of resources. So keep in mind every report, view, alarm is always competing for those system resources. So we need to optimize starting with alarms. It's a good idea to prioritize your alarms as well. Make them priority 1, 2, 3, whatever makes sense, and then change those check intervals based on whatever works best for your business. And for your reports, obviously disable any reports that are automatically running that you don't need or aren't using anymore. And you want to optimize these when they run. You want to stagger them as often as possible. If you have a big query in a report, it's best that you run these things, sometimes overnight, If you have multiple reports, again, you want to stagger those, so maybe you start them every half an hour or every hour or whatever else makes sense. For the ELM, go into the configuration of the ELM and go to Migrate DB. Is the space allocated there correct? Is the database actually in the right location? Go into your storage pools. Do those look right? Do you have all the space allocated that you actually need? It's probably a good idea to go and check all your retention groups. Make sure that none of them are actually out of space. Do you actually need to add any other storage? It would be a good time to do it. And then finally checking your retention on the ELM by going into ELM management and then view statistics. From there you can click on that ELM usage tab, and then pretty much right at the top it'll say the estimated time remaining before you actually exhaust your available storage. This will tell you based on your volume how long your retention will actually be. And then finally we have a couple of resources here for you. Outside of this webinar, there's a few YouTube videos here for best practices and for monitoring and tuning. I strongly suggest you guys take a look at that. All right, now that we've finished kind of talking about the upgrade and all the way through to fine-tuning our system, let's talk a little bit about how SIEM 11 is helping our business, which is just going to be a brief slide here. So how do we help your business? Real-time advanced analytics will allow you to know when, where, and how your valuable infrastructure is actually being used and by whom. We calculate baseline activity to know what is normal versus abnormal. We're giving you rule-based and rule-less correlation to detect known and unknown threats. We're collecting and correlating contextual information as intelligence for threat remediation, and we're allowing that proactive risk and threat detection within the same console. So we're also doing threat and risk prioritization. We're continuously monitoring and identifying threats and automatically prioritizing secure events. There's a centralized threat dashboard for comprehensive visibility and understanding of the threat landscape. There's automated alerts and workflows to accelerate the time to response. We correlate event information against threat feeds to enhance internal threat intelligence. We have active and customizable dashboards. This simplifies threat management and compliance with hundreds of pre-built dashboards, audit trails, and reports. This gives us easy and fast access to risk assessment and contextual data, reduces the time for threat identification and remediation. It also has comprehensive views of benchmark results. We can identify non-compliant systems, and we have flexible risk scoring. The SIEM is also very high performance. It leverages advanced data management systems, which optimize threat investigations and forensics. It has integrated log and threat intelligence, data collection, combined with real-time analytics and risk assessment, delivers actionable information in minutes. It's highly scalable. Our appliance enabled data collection and correlation across your infrastructure. And finally, the ease of operations. We're going to simplify threat and compliance management with over 400 pre-built dashboards, complete audit trails, content packs, and reports. Finally, it's scalable. We allow for hybrid deployment options via the cloud, on-premise, to access the threats and compliance information that fits your infrastructure the best.
Thanks, Trent. We have expanded our customer self-service capabilities, including but not limited to our McAfee Enterprise Support app for Android and iOS, new product support pages, the support community, McAfee Support YouTube channel, and social media help needs on Facebook and Twitter. The EPO Support Center plugin is available free of charge to download within your EPO application. You can learn more about the EPO Support Center on the McAfee Support YouTube channel and on support.mcafee.com.
I think that brings us to the conclusion today. I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to Trent